Hello and welcome to our final story lunchtime of the week. I know, sad. I'm Naomi. I'm a fourth year. I study physics. I'm at Castle, and it has been an absolute privilege to be your host for this week. It's been a really good time. Before we continue to what we're looking at today, just to let you know, in case of a fire, which we hope there won't be, we would all need to leave through the fire exit doors and group out on the field. And if you need the toilet at any point during our time together, there are portaloos out behind the marquee, so just feel free to go. These story lunchtimes are a chance to explore and to question the Christian faith and to think about how it impacts our story. And today's focus is a story for today, why following Jesus won't steal your sanity. We'll have a 20-minute talk from our speaker for the week, Glynn, and after that we'll have a chance for Q&A. So we'll have questions from the floor, but also during the talk, if you would like to text in some questions, I'll take them from the text as well. So this is the number to text, 07519 684 824, and that should stay on the screen during the talk, so do text in your questions as well. But without further ado, I'm going to invite Glynn up. Now this time, can we give him a massive round of applause to say thank you for speaking to us this week. Thank you so much, Glynn.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming again. And I feel we're getting to the end of a long haul this week, but we've got a great topic for tonight. And if you're here for the first time, just a reminder where I'm coming from with it in terms of background, particularly given our title, Why Following Jesus Won't Steal Your Sanity. I'm Emeritus Professor of Psychiatry at Bristol University. Emeritus, you know what emeritus means? It just means retired, okay? So that's why I'm here able to talk about some of these things with you, and it's great to be here. Thanks so much. Well, 4 decades ago, Reverend Jim Jones, a charismatic leader of an American cult based in the Guyanese jungle, led his followers into mass suicide. More than 900 people died, many of them children. It was a scandal that rocked America. How could one man exercise such a profound influence over people? It had started out so promisingly, a commune based on radical social action, racially inclusive, attracting decent people, many highly educated. Just wanted to make the world a better place. But then the Reverend Jim Jones, its leader, proclaimed himself a Messiah figure, and the commune's internal psychological controls were progressively tightened until everybody died. How can so many ordinary people become locked into something so insane, so evil? Which leads us to our final question for today. If followers of Jesus aren't especially odd, I mean, they are odd, but if they're not especially odd or emotionally needy, as we explored yesterday, could it instead be the case that otherwise rational and sensible people are being drawn into some kind of collective delusion, duped by cleverly contrived stories about a highly improbable individual called Jesus Christ? And there's Jesus himself. Even if the stories about him are vaguely reliable historically, we might ask, are we in fact looking at someone who is mentally disturbed? Or maybe he was a cult builder bent on drawing as many people like Jim Jones as possible into his own staged suicide bid. Or maybe it was neither of those two. Maybe in the theologically feverish atmosphere of a first century Judea, are we just looking at a rather intense young man who persuaded himself that it really was up to him to reconcile the whole world to God? Not so much the Saviour, just a silly boy who got out of his depth. Well, we're not the first to have asked those questions, of course. In Mark's biography that you've got in that book and cover in front of you on your seats, in Mark's biography of Jesus, it's recorded that Jesus' own family turned up saying he's beside himself, and they tried to take him home and get him to calm down, dear. And when the best-known follower of Jesus, the Apostle Paul, when he appeared before the Roman governor Festus and began to talk about the resurrection of Jesus, Festus interrupted him. He said, "Paul, you are out of your mind. So much learning's sent you insane." So, in this brief time we've got together, we've got two questions. First, are today's Jesus followers, people like me, caught up in some kind of collective delusion? And second, if he existed at all, was Jesus himself mentally disturbed? Or if not actually insane, some kind of manipulative cult builder? Well, I guess I'd better start by asking, what do we mean by the word delusion? We know it from Dawkins' God delusion, don't we? It's a hallmark of psychosis, one of the most severe forms of mental illness. Well, psychiatrists use the terms like this. It's a fixed, demonstrably false belief, out of keeping with the person's social context and resistant to reason. A fixed, false belief, out of keeping with context and resistant to reason. Delusions have got many forms. If you look on the BBC website today, you'll see there an example of an identity delusion in a young woman who fell ill with encephalitis, an acute infection of the brain. Falling into the grip of an extreme identity delusion as she fell ill, she told her boyfriend and family that she was a monkey, and she was convinced she was. And then there are persecutory delusions. You know, when the guy sweeping the street believes he's being tracked by a government sponsored spy ring. So, you know, if somebody tells you they talk to an invisible being who they believe behind the scenes controls the universe, who watches and judges everything they do, and who 2,000 years ago sent his son to die and then raised him back to life and he's coming back sometime, surely doesn't that qualify for the diagnosis of a delusion too? I mean, why do religious people get a free pass on this one? Well, the hallmark of a delusion, as I've just said, is that it's demonstrably false. And of course, the proposition that there's a God of everything who revealed himself in his Son, Jesus Christ, can be easily parodied. But then, so can many other beliefs about the big questions of life. The question is, are they demonstrably false? I mean, somebody says, well, I don't know about Jesus, but I believe the university sprang into being out of nothing in something called the Big Bang. Have you ever thought how ludicrous that sounds? Technically ludicrous that sounds to somebody who's not heard it before. The Big Bang. This great science. We call it the Big Bang. And they go on to claim that something that sprang into being out of nothing is still expanding into nothing, although we're not quite sure what nothing is because it's clearly expanding into something. And it sounds preposterous. But whatever a person's beliefs, no psychiatrist worth her salt would ever brand them deluded without first submitting their beliefs to those tests. Are they demonstrably false? Is this person resistant to any kind of rational argument? What do other people believe in this culture? And look, nobody benefits from when precise concepts used to identify suffering people who have mental illness, like delusions, are bandied around and used to dismiss the views of people with whom you happen to disagree. The question is it the question is, put the Christian faith to the test. Would you do that? Would you be prepared to look into the Christian faith? Say, is it a reasonable faith? You could go to one of a couple of friends of mine, two high court judges. Only 180 of them, sorry, only 108 of them in the country. Both committed Christians. And you could ask them how their evaluation of the evidence led them to conclude that indeed Jesus did rise from the dead. Or talk to Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Marilyn Robinson about her cogent philosophical critique of neo-Darwinism and how she relates that to her strong Christian faith. Or talk to Francis Collins, one of the world's leading geneticists. In fact, he led the Human Genome Project, coordinating the work of thousands of geneticists in 6 countries around the world. Talk to him how, as a committed Jesus follower, he puts his faith together with his silence, with his science. Or if he won't take your call, read his book, The Language of God. A scientist presents evidence of belief. Now, I'm not saying that you would agree with all these people. My point is simply that these Christian believers, inhabiting quite different intellectual traditions in different parts of the world, have not been corralled in some commune which has hijacked their rationality or caught up in some collective global delusion. They've taken their intellectual gifts and they put them to work in looking into the Christian faith and say, is this a reasonable faith? And the answer they've come up with is yes. Okay, let's turn from Jesus' followers to Jesus himself. Was he ill? Could have been psychosis, this really, I described the other day, painful and can be a terrible, terrible experience. Although many get better, afflicts between 1 and 3 people per 100 at some point in their lives. Extraordinarily high. Did Jesus have a psychiatric illness? Well, atheist Christopher Hitchens made that claim repeatedly. One of his main examples that he uses to support his claim was the incident where Jesus counseled his disciples to take no thought for the morrow. Hitchens liked to use the old King James translation of the original Greek for some reason, but and I'll give you the original text as he quotes it. Jesus said, "Take therefore no thought for the morrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." Now take no thought for tomorrow, says Hitchens. This is palpably insane. I mean, nobody can live their life like that. You're leading your followers into a black hole if you tell them to take no thought for the morrow. I mean, no pension planning, no Sainsbury deliveries, no summer holiday bookings, a world in which every morning you wake up to an empty diary and an empty fridge. This is a sure sign, he rails, of a profoundly unstable mind. I don't know about you, I find myself saying, is this really an argument? I mean, almost any sensible Bible commentary will tell you that the original Greek that's been translated "take no thought" in the King James Version was used most commonly to mean don't worry unduly. That's what it means, don't fret. And Jesus is simply saying there's enough going on to worry about today without overloading your stress management systems with anxious ruminations about tomorrow. Open any manual of cognitive therapy and you'll see that one of the hallmarks of anxiety disorder is an excessive preoccupation with the future. Jesus' words here are not signs of madness. It's good mental hygiene. I have to say, given his intellectual caliber, I'm astonished that Hitchens relies on this. Look at the YouTube video when you get home. And I challenge you to take away these gospels from that were on your seats and read about Jesus for yourself and work out for yourself, is this someone who was mentally unstable? Far from being a madman, this book by Andrew Sims, a past president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So at that point, he was the leading psychiatrist in the UK, argues not only was Jesus there were no credible signs that he was mentally ill, but he argues the healthiest mind of all. I'd love to have time to look at some of the ways in which Jesus' wonderfully healthy mind was put to work as he entered into relationships with people. But I'm going to read a small chunk from Luke chapter 15, just one example. And I just want you to spot his clever wit, his deft use of language, his empathy, and his courage in communication. And it's this. Oh, by the way, the situation is, it's one of those situations where Jesus is calling out the pride of those religious leaders again. We talked about it yesterday. And they're standing in judgment on him, and they're saying, reaching out to the poor and marginal Jesus again, these no-hopers following you around. Jesus, you're wasting your time and tainting your soul. And so Jesus turns on them. He tells them a story. He loved to tell a story. And he said, supposing one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Loses a sheep. Does he not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? Pause. Now, I want you to imagine how they respond to that question Jesus has just posed. Supposing one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them, does he not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost sheep? And they think, yeah. And they think, no, you don't. Ask anybody around here, Jesus, that's crazy, because they will tell you don't leave a bunch of sheep alone in the wilderness. If sheep can look after themselves in the wilderness, you don't need shepherds. So Jesus continues, back at verse 5. And when he finds it, the sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he goes round, knocks on the door of all his neighbors, and he says, we're having a party. Rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. Question mark? Isn't that what you do? And they're thinking, I don't think anybody around here would do that. They'd be thinking, who's going to break the news to this numpty that now he's lost the other 99? And then maybe the twinkle in Jesus' eye disappears. And he looks them in the eye and he says, I tell you, there'll be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner that repents than all the other 99 righteous people. And the point of this story, don't overwork the logic in it. The point of it, it's a nuanced, clever story that wins the heart as well as the mind. And the story is telling God is reckless in his grace, in his coming for us, to address the HPTSU, the human propensity to screw up, the thing that's wrong in our hearts. God's love, his grace is the word, is reckless. It's crazy. It's bizarre. Because he's like that. Anyone who says, I'm lost, that's me, he's after you. And the other 99 who says, I'm found, fine. I don't need that stuff. Stay in the wilderness, because he's looking for the little guy who's willing to own up and come clean, the HPTSU. And as a clinical psychiatrist over the course of my career, I just want to finish by saying that my story is that the more I've seen of Jesus, the more I've wanted to follow him. And the times when I've taken a wrong turning, and there's been a few of them in my 69 years, or gone cool in my faith, and that's happened, have been when I've taken my eyes off him. Because what I see in him is not madness, the healthiest mind of all. So my last question before you start yours. In our evening sessions, if you've been along, Vaughan ask us to put ourselves on a scale of 1 to 5, representing where we stand in the Christian faith. And 1 is no thanks. 5 is I'm a Jesus follower. And then there's the grades of the journey in between. And you can go forward and you can go back on this journey. But Vaughan invited us to just think for a moment where we are in relation to those claims of Jesus Christ. Follow me. I want you. Where are we in thinking through some of the issues involved and what that would mean? Maybe it's an interesting conversation point at the end. Ask someone, just out of interest, where are you? But here's the thing, what will get you over the line? If talking, coming and having a chat with me would help get you over the line, please come and have a chat. If joining up to the search round at the back there would help get you over the line, please do that. If picking up this book, Jesus for Skeptics by Michael Green would help, please do that. And it's so important, especially if you're someone here and you're saying, the more I look into this Christian faith, the more it begins to make intellectual sense to me than I'd supposed. Or others, it's making surprising emotional sense in terms of the way it speaks into the personal issues I've got with identity and meaning and longing. Keep looking, keep searching, keep thinking. But in the end, bear this in mind. You've got to make a decision. There have been very few big decisions in my life that haven't in the end required me to say, well, I've done the research. Now I've got to dive in. ABC, accept there's wrong in your life that needs putting right. B, believe that Jesus came looking for you to die in your place. And C, commit your life to him. And I guess over the past 5 days, I've just been doing my best to say, I really do believe that you can trust him with it. So thanks so much for listening again. Naomi, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Glynn. Just before we get on to Q&A time, I just want to draw your attention to the things that have been sitting on your chairs or on your tables. Firstly, thank you. Firstly, Glynn was mentioning this book, Uncover Mark. This is Mark's Gospel, which is one of the books in the Bible, and it's just got extra little bits of study guide help. So it's great for just asking more questions, going a bit deeper into the text, understanding it better, and it's great to do either on your own or with a friend. I'm doing it at the moment, and it's going really well, so definitely take those away with you. We don't need to keep them here, so please do take them with you. They're our gift for you. The second thing is these Connect cards, the green ones. We would love to hear from you. So if you have any comments or questions, or you would like us to get in touch with you, then do just fill those out and put them in the boxes on your way out later. If you do put your personal details on there, just remember to tick the little box at the bottom, and that lets us know that you're happy for us to use your details to get in contact with you. And then, final thing. The final thing is these flyers. So I was about to say the schedule for the week. We've only got one more event, sadly, which is this evening. So tonight we're back here at 7:15 for cake and hot chocolate and a performance from Steph Devlin, as well as hearing Anna's story. So Anna is a third-year student here studying theology. We're going to hear about her story of pursuing meaning and happiness, as well as a talk on the purpose of life. So do make it along tonight if you can. But that's not where it ends. You'll see on the other side of the flyer. Whoa. Information about the search. So Glynn briefly mentioned it. The search is an opportunity to continue asking these questions and to keep discussing topics like this together. And there'll be at 7:30 at Sanctuary 21 every Tuesday for the rest of term. So if you would like to spend Tuesday evenings discussing more of this, basically continuing what we've already started here, then you'd be really welcome at that. I've been before and I loved it. There was tea and coffee and some really good cake. makes, and just a great chance to discuss. That's the main focus. There'll be like a 20-minute or just like a short talk based on some of the stories from Mark's Gospel, followed by extended time for discussing around tables what you just heard and what you think. And yeah, so it's really great. If you've enjoyed what you've been to this week, if you're the kind of person who's been sitting there and still really skeptical, please can I encourage you to come. If you've been sitting here and then spending your afternoons chatting away in the cafe, please keep coming. It's a wonderful opportunity. So yeah, that's the third thing, the search. In terms of Q&A, I'm actually going to start with, there's quite a few of you here, so I thought I'd start with launching out with a question from the floor, and then I'll come onto the phone. Do keep texting in as well. So hands up if you would like to ask a question from the floor. Yeah, right in the middle there, thanks.
Firstly, thanks for your speech, and I really appreciate your impassioned eloquence. And I have a few questions I want to discuss with you. And the first question is, as I have been here like every lunchtime and evening talk, and we've been discussed a lot about whether the Jesus story is true. But what it seems more plausible to me is like whether I think it's not a question of whether it is true, because the problem is that no one can claim to monopolize truth. So I would rather say it is a question of every human beings, they're willing to meaning, and if the Christian faith fits to their personal narrative. So I wanted to hear your opinions about that. And also, because I think... Can
I take that one first? Otherwise, I'll forget the first one, all right?
Thank you.
and also, someone else may want to jump in, but I think, you know, I think I hear what... Thank you so much for the question, first of all. I think you're saying if, in a way, if the Christian faith fits your existential mode, your personal will to meaning, if it works for you, great. Just don't try and say that it has a truth bearing beyond that for others. We all need to find our truth, something along those lines. Would that be okay? Yeah. And I, you know, I can see the force of that, but I think that kind of relativism leaves us with far more questions. That true for you leaves us, for example, what do we do with the evidence from the text? There's a lot, Christians spend a lot of time saying, how can we trust these texts? Because the texts themselves don't talk about some mythical being. They talk about a person on the earth at a specific point in time, at a certain place, who is said to have died in a particular tomb and risen on a hill in a particular tomb, rose from the dead. It's very specific in its claims. The claims of Christianity are that God has entered into time-space history and moved among us. They're verifiable claims in terms of looking at the documentary evidence. Why would you want to do all that and say, well, if it works for you, fine? The Christian faith itself is claiming something larger, that it's a truth for everybody, that it is the truth. And I think that's just the central claim of the Christian faith itself. And I kind of wish it were, in one sense. It's so much easier. I wouldn't have to stand here because I just, you know, we all find our truth. We all go on our journey. But it isn't that way, because I don't think Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And he made these astonishingly global claims about the nature of things and said, now look at the evidence for that for yourself, which is where I'm kind of coming from.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Would anyone else like to ask a question from the floor? Oh, also, just to say, if you would like to continue that discussion, then Glynn will be sticking around after, so it would be really great. You can just come up and probe him more and ask him more about that. But yeah, we'll take another question. Yeah, let's go over here.
Hiya. this could be me making some assumptions, but so in my sort of what I feel like is that more people are reluctant to believe in like the existence of the Old Testament and what happened in that, but it's perhaps easier to believe in the New Testament because it's more recent, or we have perhaps more evidence that those people existed. And so I'm wondering, do you think people have more of an issue with the existence of God than the existence of like Jesus? And is it sort of possible to follow Jesus while still being unsure about God?
There's a few kind of questions packed in with that, aren't there? The Old Testament first, the first person I go to personally in terms of how I should approach the Old Testament is Jesus himself. Because I'm a Christian, I follow him. So I said, well, what was his relationship to the Old? How did he see this? And far from there being a discontinuity, so much of Jesus' teaching was actually rooted incredibly in the Old Testament. He was soaked in it, he was saturated in it, and he deferred to its authority. He pointed people to its authority. So that would lead me to be reluctant to put the Old Testament one side for a start. I think the second point, Jesus himself. Can you believe in Jesus without believing in God? I don't think you can, because can you believe in Jesus without listening to anything he says? Possibly, but for me, that isn't a follower of Jesus. It's a rather abstract Jesus now. If I follow Jesus, the historical Jesus, then I have to listen to what he says. And the claims he made about himself are so astonishing in terms of his being the way, the truth, and the life. I and the Father are one. This is a claim to divinity. Vaughan was saying earlier in the week, Son, your sins are forgiven you. Another claim to divinity. It's hard to follow him, but I don't actually, follow much of what you say. This is a God of your own manufacture. You're using him as a kind of a projection panel. Sheilaism that I talked about the other day. It's my faith projected onto someone else to suit in a way that works for me. That isn't the Christian faith. It says this may not work for you, but here is what it is. Listen, So.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a great question. I'm going to take one from the text and then come back to the floor. So just as we were talking a bit about the Bible there as well, you said that you had to look at the Greek to understand what Jesus said in that passage. Does that mean that we can't trust anything in the English Bible at all, and we have to always look at the original text? That seems like a problem.
Is this someone from Cranmer Hall or something like that? Or St. John's? Or to be honest, ideally, I think the ideal would be to read the original text. But people like me need people who are scholars to make those interpretations make those translations rather for me, and that's what happens. So there are a number of different translations which often slightly nuance the text or pick out meanings of words in a way that emphasizes in the English slightly different facets of a word. But it's not that difficult to take a couple of versions and to together arrive at the underlying meaning of the Greek, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Glynn. Would anyone else like to ask a question from the floor? I think let's go, not just to make you run, but let's go all the way to the to the back. Purple hoodie.
What is it about Christianity that makes it better for you than other religions, or more preferable for you to follow? And do you feel like if you were raised in a different culture, you would find the same meaning and happiness in a different religion?
Right, what a great point, yeah. Can I just say, first of all, as I said the other day, we're in a marketplace of ideas. That's what a university is. And I would fight for anyone else's right to talk about their religion, their point of view, their worldview. And I'd say, put up your stall, let's have the conversation. But over on this stall here, I really do believe that Jesus is the unique revelation of God, that God has spoken his last word to humankind in his own presence on earth in the coming of Jesus, the incarnation. God himself becomes a man. And other faiths often have reflections of that, parts of what they're seeking, parts of what they see. They reflect bits of the Christian story. I think that's absolutely true. But it's the Christian story that puts it all together. Now, were I abroad and in a different culture, would my faith work for me? I think it probably would work for me in that it would get me through the day. I was in Thailand, I remember, with another professor of psychiatry, and we had to go into a temple. He had to do make a few rituals in there, and I said, help me understand what that was about. He said, I've got to earn merit. I've got to earn merit with the gods, you see. And that would get me through the day doing that. I think a far better way is to just face the reality that before a holy God, I can be earning merit until I'm blue in the face. I need a savior who's going to stand in my place, deal with my sin, and flood me with the grace of God, which says, you're my son. You're not on a treadmill. You're my son. And that's why, for me, I'm so pleased I'm a Christian.
Thank you, Glynn. As with any of these questions, if you want to discuss this more, please do come and chat to Glynn, or maybe ask if you come with a friend who's a Christian. Ask them their opinion as well. It's always good to continue these conversations. I'm going to do one more question from the text, and then we'll have a break. I think this one might have been off the back of the story of the lost sheep. I'm not sure, but it says, "How can you believe in an all-loving God that seems to be abandoning so many?"
Well, Jesus made it really clear. If what you've got to do with Jesus, he tells you a story. You'd be crazy to think all of the truth is contained in that story. He told lots of different stories, and the Bible isn't like a textbook of bullet points of information that you've got. It puts together a picture of God in real human encounters. So in that story, you've got a picture of God's reckless love for the little one who is lost. In other stories, you see Jesus reaching out to people who don't want to know him, don't want to hear him. But in the end, he'll say, I respect your choice. So in a way, the sheep are choosing to be there, but that would be stretching that analogy too far. But it's not that he abandons the sheep. It's just that if the sheep aren't lost and they can't... Remember the context. He's looking at the Pharisees who will not see their own need. And they're hiding in their self-righteousness, and their pride is the mind trap that's stopping them from seeing what they really are inside. And he's simply saying that I respect you are a human, you are free. And that is what makes the idea of the judgment of God so, on the one hand, terrifying, but on the other hand, so reassuring, because God doesn't treat us as robots. He holds us as responsible human beings. Choose who you want to serve.
Thank you, Glynn. Yeah, and if that was your question and you're asking it because you do personally feel abandoned by God, again, come and chat to us. Don't leave that hanging. Come and discuss that with Glynn.
That's a great point, actually.
We are going to take a break there for a couple of minutes. For those of you who need to head off to lectures now, feel free to do that. If you're able to stick around, we have a load more questions on the phone, and we'd love to take more questions from the floor as well, so do stick around. Thanks. Let's kick off with a question from the floor. Does anyone want to fire a question from the floor? It's actually quite difficult to see if anyone's even put it there. Oh, we have a question over here. Okay, over there. There were lots of bags and people around. I actually couldn't see any hands.
Hi. We were thinking, you talk about Jesus coming into time and space and coming into the world, but do you have any ideas of why he chose that particular moment in history rather than lots of other periods where perhaps you could I'd say arguably there was a need, or like why that point and that moment was significant, and how
Yeah.
that can apply to us now, given that it was a different sort of period.
Yes, it's a great point, and it kind of links with the wider points of why appear at such an insignificant place, why such an insignificant family leaves no books, and that particular point in history, arguably, the point at that point in history was, of course, that the Roman Empire made it possible for ideas to spread quite quickly. And just 300 years later, Christianity would become the main faith of the whole of the Roman Empire and establish the foundations for Western civilization in terms of many of our values of human rights and rule of law and so on. Eventually establish the foundation. But beyond that, I said this earlier in the week, I'm quite comfortable with kind of not knowing everything or not understanding all the bits and pieces, because there's so much of this world that I don't understand as well, quantum mechanics and so on. And as a psychiatrist, you get used very quickly, believe me, to not understanding everything. The moment you approach the human brain, you are not understanding everything, big time. So I think it's an interesting question, but I don't really have a cool answer as to why that point, other than that God is God. And if that was the time, it was the right time. Because my picture of God, my sense of God is that I can trust him for that. I haven't got a better answer than that, though. Sorry.
Thank you for your question. Does anyone else want to ask a question from the floor? I do still have text, and you can keep texting in if you'd rather do it that way.
Let's have a text.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm choosing to answer this one just because I recognise that we've done a lot of thinking intellectually about Christianity. So it says, what can I do to feel God?
Right.
So it doesn't just make sense in my head, but in my heart.
Yeah. I think the first point is to just accept we are different. Some of us are much more left-brained. I don't really go in for a sharp left-right dichotomy. It's way oversimplified. But there is something about, and you'll see this, some of us being more left-brained in that the values of the left brain, which are linearity, logic, language, those are things we like. We like things to be clear. We like words. We like explanations. Whereas other people, they don't go for the detail. They go for the big picture and the feeling, and the kind of the flow of things is what hits them first. That is their personality. And so some people very naturally will feel some of this stuff very quickly and connect with God emotionally. Others connect with God intellectually. And that doesn't mean it's a cold thing. It means that when they see God's truth and the way it comes together, it goes to the pit of their stomach and gives them a sense of wholeness, completion. But it's not emotional in the same way. So I want to say there's no one size fits all. Just because someone's swinging from the chandeliers over there, if God meets you in a book or hear a reading about someone's story, allow him to meet you in the way that fits your personality. On the other hand, it is a journey, and the Christian faith, I have times now where my sense of God goes cold, and it's hard. Often if I'm preoccupied with something else, if I've got other things to do, and I lose that sense of God's presence emotionally for a while. Sometimes it's just simply the circadian rhythm of our emotions. Our emotions are up and our emotions down. It's part of being human, this. So if you're particularly going through a lower patch, don't overwork that. Don't worry. But if you'd like to know more of God's presence, I'd say keep looking at Jesus. Go along to a church where they'll teach you about him, but not simply explain about him, but they'll convey something of the wholeness of him, his beauty, His majesty, His goodness as well. Where there's a reality there that says, I don't just believe it's true, I believe that it works, it's part of my life, it's who I am, it's who I want to be. So I've got no easy answer, no formula, prescription pad on that, but keep going, won't you? Just let God love you in His own way and in your way.
Yeah, and that's definitely the sort of one that you can chat to a Christian friend about. How have they felt God in the past? What does that look like for them? Is there any other question from the floor? I can shoot one from the phone again. Personally, I find it hard to believe about the post-mortal life and heaven, mostly because the thought of death scares me most. How do you get used to this thought? I guess this concept of afterlife.
Yeah. I'd love to know a bit more about this person asking the question. Come and have a chat, because I don't want to say something there that's misread your experience. If that person does want to flesh that question out a little bit more, do stick up your hand. But maybe they're not even here now. But the thing that strikes me immediately is if one does believe in heaven, that when the body finally expires, that we step into God's reality. In fact, a greater reality, something that's more real than actually this feels, then that should transform our anticipation of death. Because Paul, the apostle, says, death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? It's now a door into a new life for a Christian. Of course, there is a fear of death. If one rejects Christ, you don't know what comes next. But if you're a believer, if you love God, you need to know that heaven is your home. That's where you belong, and death is the doorway into that.
I'll do another one from the text. I'm not sure if I'm going to properly say this, but it's okay. I do not believe that the Christian faith or Jesus is supposed to spread madness. However, I do think that for some people, especially if there are many of them within a community, it might feed it. I can't explain any other way why some Christians would go on a murderous purge to kill. In my mind, I'm thinking of things like the Crusades, but I'm not quite sure what this person's referencing. Yeah. What do you think about this?
Yeah, undoubtedly the case that we are all susceptible to social conformity effects. In other words, groups do affect the way we look at the world and the way we evaluate the world. We're very sensitive to what other people think. So you get in a large group, and your way you're looking at the world can be shifted by those group pressures. That's very well established. There's lots of research. And it's not just Christian belief that is susceptible to those kind of phenomena, of course. Look at the Nuremberg rallies. I just finished a book a few weeks ago on the techniques Hitler and Goebbels used to win a nation for a perverse doctrine, set of beliefs. So everybody is capable of using these kind of emotional techniques to further their aim. The issue is we go back, is it true or not? That's what one has to keep looking at. Is there sufficient for me to believe here? If you feel you're getting caught up in some group effect, get out. Because if it's worth having, you know, it'll stand alone, your relationship with God. But that shouldn't stop you. Having said that, those extreme group effects, that shouldn't stop you benefiting from all of the potential of being part of a fellowship and being part of a group where people are rooting for you and batting for you and helping grow you as a new Christian. So like most things in life, it's a balance, isn't it? It's a matter of balance.
Thank you, Glynn. Does anyone else have a question from the floor? No? No? Okay. Okay, Okay, this is a bit of a different topic. Now that we know how big the universe is and that there are likely other species with civilizations or creativity, how does the meaning of God's decision to send a human son to Earth change if God is responsible for the whole universe?
Well, it's a hypothetical question. I'm not sure I'd concede quite as much as the questioner assumes. We have a conversation about that. It's possible. And so I think you're saying, if that were the case, what would the situation be? I'm not sure. As I say, I'm really comfortable about not being sure about loads of stuff. I keep coming back to this point, but I trust someone who I think is. Because what I've seen of Jesus always leads me to trust him. That if I don't have all the information, I think he does. And looking at the Jesus I follow, I'm pretty sure that it'll be good. That's who he is by definition. He's good. And so it won't leave me, when I find out the answer to your question, kind of puzzled or think, well, that's not fair. I'm not going to out-compassion God or outclass his wisdom. It'll be good. It'll be right. But if you want to speculate, it depends on what's happened in those other communities, those other populations. We don't know whether they would have fallen in the sense that things are so screwed up on the earth here because of human sin. We don't know what their journeys would be. We don't know. So.
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you, whoever
thank
asked
you
it. This one is probably particularly helpful to ask you, Glynn. It says, as someone who has studied the mind, do you believe that there is more to consciousness than processes in the brain?
Sorry, excuse my laughing. No, it's just a huge question, and I don't think I want to get started on it. But there clearly is more to consciousness than processes in the brain, depending on how you define consciousness and how you understand processes in the brain. And this is a hugely complex question that leaves neuroscientists scratching their heads and philosophers scratching their heads. And I can tell you this, if anybody says they know the answer to that question, do not believe them. Because human consciousness is what it is, how it works, how it emerged out of physical interactions, physical properties, is one of the great mysteries of life. We don't know.
I'll do one more from text and then I'll come to the floor, so do be thinking about what you're going to ask. Glynn's making fun of me because I say do be a lot, but hopefully no one else has noticed that. Why does God need us to believe in him in order to perform his power? Is that a limitation of being God?
I don't think he needs us to believe in him to perform. He'll perform his power whether we believe in him or not. But what he wants is not to be powerful over us. He wants to love us, and he wants us to love him. The whole drama of the gospel is about God coming after those he loves and seeking our love. That's partly the explanation of the mystery of the hiddenness of God. You think, well, if there's a God, why doesn't he just kind of throw back the curtains? Then we all know where we are. But the problem is, when he throws back the curtains, you are overwhelmed. You are overwhelmed with his glory, his majesty, and he seeks your love. And so you don't need to believe in him for his power to be shown, but because he's capable of showing his power in any way he wants, he's bent his power in service to us to say, I love you, and that's the core of the gospel. He doesn't need us. He's not a needy person, but he desires our love as we desire him, because love is who he is.
Yeah, it's so good. Thank you, Glynn. Does anyone have a question from the floor? Yep.
Vaughan last night spoke about Jesus saying on several occasions that he was going to die, and then walking towards his death, and I think staying silent when people were condemning him to death. Aren't those all the marks of someone who's insane?
It depends on the context. Certainly, Jesus' grandiose claims about himself. There could be seen as typical grandiose delusions. In fact, I spent a lot of my time working in mental health, listening to people telling me they were Jesus. So the claims he made for himself are not unusual in psychiatry. The question is, was it true? Because if it was true that he was who he said he was, then it clearly wasn't a delusion. The other question is, where are the features of his life typical of people who have delusions? And that is certainly not the case. The rest of his life is extraordinarily balanced, aside from these central claims about his divinity. Now, I believe they're true, so I don't believe he was deluded. But someone who sets his face to the cross, who lays down his life in this way, do you know how many people kill themselves? It's 1 in 100. It's probably 1 in 50 nearer. Just think about that. Every hearse you see, just count 99, 100, kill themselves. It's part of the desperate lives so many of us live. And yet, this isn't Jesus in desperation committing suicide. It's Jesus laying down his life. And what I see in that planned process of giving up his life is enormous mental strength, actually, and purpose, and conviction, and resolve. And I don't think those are the hallmarks of someone who's... They occur in people who are mentally ill, but none of what you described there is the hallmark of someone who's lost their mind. I'd say it's someone who, if you read the Gospels, very much knew who he was and knew why he'd come.
Thank you, Glynn. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, no worries. I think
Great.
we're going to wrap it
We're
up there.
through. Wonderful. That's
yeah,
great.
if you would like to chat to Glynn more, please do come up and... I need to start saying that. Please come up and ask me your questions.
Yes, please.
and chat.
I'll be hanging around anyway.
Yeah,
So.
or do continue these conversations out in the cafe. We are going to have the cafe free now for the whole afternoon.
Wow.
So stick around. Woo! Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.